And he's quite an amazing talent because he's had all this impact in the various digital media. In fact, if you probably played some of these games, The Last of Us, Uncharted 4, God of War, Dead Stranding, and features like Beowulf, Monster House, and The Polar Express. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome Senior Director of Visual Art, PlayStation, the one and only Micheal Mumbauer.
Wow. Is this on? Excellent. I feel a bit like an inspirational speaker with this weird mic on my face. I apologize. I just want to say thank you to MDEC, Hosnul, Dato Yasmin, Priya, and all the people at MDEC have helped put this together and invited me here to speak with you. Okay, cool. So we're going to kind of do this presentation Back to the Future style. I like Robert Zemeckis and I like Back to the Future. If you guys are okay with that, we're going to bounce around in time a little bit. That's me, the kid whose mother dressed him up in the Snoopy thing back in around 1979 in the beginning of the game industry. Also kind of my beginning, very young, but I grew up with this industry when it basically was built 25 cents at a time. You can see the industry basically started around that same time, and the curve just keeps going up, and the sales are getting tremendous, and this industry is really growing exponentially. This year alone, the game industry looks like it's going to cross $140 billion globally. 50% of the market is mobile, which is great, and the other two split between PC and console, which is kind of where I'm at. And a huge part of that market is Southeast Asia and Asia in general. Amazing. Good job. Thank you, Malaysia, for your contribution. We look at how this compares to the film because they do have a background a little bit in that as well. So when you look at TV and video revenue, it's still quite large, almost $300 billion in that industry. Box office industry is about $40 billion. So games are actually a bit bigger than film now. That's happened for a while. But I think a part of that is also in the TV and revenue, so it's maybe not exactly one-to-one. China's obviously growing market. U.S. is leading film market, and 52% of Americans prefer watching movies at home. I know I do. How many people here prefer watching movies at home? 52%? No? 10? So Fortnite. Anybody play Fortnite? This year, that was kind of the big thing. PUBG, Fortnite, games as a service. It's making a fortune for Epic, which is great. They're doing really well. And this is one of the pieces of the narrative of this year of kind of the things that are happening. Multiplayer gaming has always been huge. Obviously, it's getting bigger. AAA development, some of the things happening there. By 2020, the average game budget for console AAA is going to be between 200 and 250 million US dollars. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of risk. And games in console basically double every 10 years. And with that risk, there's always changes in the industry that are not always positive. Some of our favorite developers have gone away this year. Visceral was working on a pretty interesting title with Amy Hennig, and when they closed that studio down, there was a lot of noise about, well, is this the death of single-player gaming? And I hope not. My preference in terms of gaming is single-player, story, narrative-driven, which is why I'm at PlayStation and why I love what I do there. So it was a bit scary, but this comes up every couple of years whenever there's a change. Farmville on Facebook. They say, well, it's over. But right after that, there was a whole lot of releases, single-player releases this year that really blew up, created a whole lot of revenue for PlayStation and all of the game publishers that were putting games out that were of really high caliber and telling really, really good stories. And you can see the revenue here is pretty great. Anybody playing Red Dead yet? So this is also a nice indicator that I think single-player games and story narrative-driven games are here to stay. These guys are some of the best at doing this, and I'm super excited to play it. So for me, I think this comes down to, for games in general and for single-player gaming, that we all love to tell and be told great stories, right? If we have a great story, then we can get a compelling experience, and it's something that we want to be a part of. Last of Us, which came out in 2013, was kind of a landmark for me personally, because this was the moment I sort of got a, wow, we arrived. Because developing a connection with digital characters is such a difficult thing to do. Creating empathy with digital characters is very, very hard. We look at these things and they are attempting to be human, but if they don't feel right, they can be kind of repulsive. And so here's a scene from The Last of Us. I'm going to kind of depress you guys for a minute.
But... Yes, sir.
Listen, buddy, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Shit. Please don't. Oh, no. Sarah. Move your hands, babe. I know, baby, I know. Listen to me, I know this hurts. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. No. No, no, no. Please. 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 Please don't. Please.
So as an industry, I love that we're able to do that, but I hate watching that scene. Oh my God, it's so depressing. I have my own kids and I watch that thing and it just like super bums me out. But one of the things that's really interesting about that scene is it, for me, and again, I think from the industry, when I talk to people, they look at this and they say, wow, this game really changed things for me. A lot of my friends, they just watch this. They'll watch me play. They just want to see this story. They don't have to play it. And they talk about how amazing the story was. And this, for me, was the moment that I think Mario grew up. This is, for me, where I felt like, wow, we really did it. And I wondered, what if we did this scene 20 years ago? Like, what would it look like when I grew up if we tried to do this? Like, how important are the graphics, and how important are the actors, and how important is the music? How important is this stuff to actually resonating with people and creating that level of empathy? So at the studio, I had one of my colleagues and friends do a test. I'm going to show you what that looks like to see what if Last of Us, that scene was done 20 years ago. So it's much less of a bummer, actually. So it's funny about The Last of Us, and when I look at this, and again, comparing what's happening in TV and film and all the stuff that I'm interested in, and I talked about a lot of people telling me they're just watching The Last of Us. 20 million people watched PewDiePie play The Last of Us. That's crazy. 20 million people. Bigger than the highest rated episode of The Walking Dead. So that's pretty interesting from a standpoint of an interactive thing being consumed, non-interactively. So when we look at that space, there we go. When we look at the space of what's happening in streaming, it's amazing how fast the streaming, linear media space is growing. They say by 2019, 80% of the traffic on the internet is going to be video-based content, right? It's an incredibly fast-growing business. And there's an arms race for content right now. Disney's creating their own streaming service, and they're going to be taking all their content back from Netflix, so you won't see the Marvel movies and the shows really on there anymore, and you're not going to see the animated stuff very soon. And so they're going to be looking for all kinds of new content to try to capture new audiences and new markets. And so when you look at the trends of the type of stuff that's most popular, fantasy, sci-fi, superhero, anime-based stuff, this is really, really popular, right? Look at the top shows: Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, Westworld, Flash. This is all interesting. It's all genre-based stuff. Anything else sound like it might fit into that? Probably video games. So I think video games are coming. We've already seen stuff happening in terms of the Netflix announcements. There's a bunch of stuff that rumors that I can't really speculate on, but these are the ones that are confirmed. Obviously, Castlevania came out and did really well. We don't know what the numbers are because they don't share that, but we know people are watching it and they're doing a second season. And The Witcher, everybody's going nuts over. Henry Cavill played Superman's going to be starring in that show. So this is big stuff. So I don't know if you saw this. Watch this real quick.
Okay, I'm in. Oh, Sully. You really need to check out this room.
Yeah, maybe on the next door. Hurry up, will you? Those guys gonna be on to you in a minute.
Oh, here we go. I found Sil Albuquerque's letters. Ooh. This guy's not messing around. He's got original copies dating back to the conquest of Mallorca.
What? Isn't that here? So that's a fan film done by Nathan Fillion and a bunch of guys they released at Comic-Con. Basically had nothing to do with Sony, but they were basically trying to show what they thought an Uncharted television show would look like, or a movie or whatever, and it was pretty cool. But it's not what I think is going to happen. What I think is going to happen is I think these video game IPs that we're going to start seeing come over, I think they're going to come over in a different way. I think they're going to come over onto streaming in the next decade, a lot like they look in our games now. I think the cutscenes that we have now are going to end up actually becoming TV shows. And I think they're going to be done in game engines. We're starting to see that now. Unity and Unreal are pushing for this space really heavily. And there's not a lot of content out there that you can kind of point to, and there's a couple reasons we're going to talk to you a little bit why that's not happening, but you can see this is starting to come, and really, I think you're going to see from 2020 and beyond, you're going to see this become a real big space. And for me, we talk about transmedia convergence. This has been talked about for pretty much, I think, the beginning of video games, when things will kind of converge, and I think that this really will be a moment in time where that really can actually genuinely happen. So let's go back to the past. Whatever there is fear, there is opportunity. When there is great fear, there is great opportunity. Whenever I've seen something that has been a bit disruptive and makes people uncomfortable, and there's a change, I sort of know that there's something big there. That's generally where I've always in my life and in my career felt that's where I want to go. I kind of want to be in that uncomfortable space. And growing up, obviously I was influenced by games, but I was also influenced by film, dinosaurs, Toy Story, all this stuff. And it made me really want to go even more deeply into this digital character animation world. And so I went to school in New York City a long time ago to study computer animation at a time when there weren't really degrees in computer animation. They hadn't graduated one yet. So they were discovering what that meant. And at that time, it was really interesting because traditional art degrees were really threatened by the computer art degrees. A lot of these guys didn't consider computer art real art, and it looked very different. And it's very heavily technology driven and tool driven. And so I remember talking to some of the artists, some of the illustration majors, and they said, look, I'm never going to use Photoshop. I'm not going to do that. And I thought to myself, well, you might not be finding a job because everything moves forward. Technology is what drives entertainment. So also in that time, one of the biggest games that was, one of the franchises, and also one of the biggest games that I was playing and that was very popular at the time was Final Fantasy. It's still popular, but Final Fantasy VII was one of my favorite games, and Sakaguchi-san, the director, decided to take his shot at making a film. And so he really pushed digital characters forward in a way, humans, like they hadn't really been done before, and he took a lot of risk. And so on the right is actually an instructor of mine from school who took a job with Sakaguchi-san basically as the motion capture director for this film. And when he did that, I sort of became very interested in this space and in this technology and what it meant and what the future might mean. We all thought, honestly, this was going to change things. We thought this is how movies are going to be made. We thought, digital humans were basically going to be the future. And so I sought after the knowledge to learn this space, but it wasn't really easy to do. There wasn't a lot of places you could go, and certainly the schools didn't teach it. So I found a place, coincidentally, that I could work in New York that actually allowed me to have some exposure to this space. But again, being that I wanted to be in animation, being that I wanted to be in games, being that I wanted to do CG, one of the only places to work in New York, there were no game studios, the only place to work was Blue Sky. You guys know Blue Sky, Ice Age, sound familiar? So some of the teachers actually that spoke and lectured at the school also worked at Blue Sky. And I would talk to them and I would say, hey, I'm really interested in motion capture. And they said, don't tell anybody that. They said, if you tell them that, you will guarantee you will not get a job at Blue Sky. And that was a really weird comment, I thought, but it was something that would become kind of a trend. So I later on got an opportunity to work on this film called Polar Express, which was great. I got to experiment more in motion capture. This was an amazing opportunity for me. And this was on the heels of Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy was done with traditional kind of game motion capture techniques, but the Polar Express had incorporated facial capture. And so they redubbed it performance capture because it was capturing the entirety of a performance. But then this came up. Anybody heard of the uncanny valley? Raise your hand if you've heard that term. So that term came up. I'd never heard of it until I worked on this film. When the film came out, this became a topic of conversation everywhere because they talked about how creepy this film looked and how scary the digital characters looked and how dead their eyes looked. And this term came up because it was actually a robotics term from a Japanese scientist. I can't remember his name, but basically the more lifelike something became without actually being completely believable, the more you rejected it. It started to remind you of death or morbid. It was very creepy. And so people really were repulsed by some of this stuff that was happening in the Polar Express. The other thing that was happening with the Polar Express is that it created division between animation and these people that were kind of technical animators. Animators were terrified that they were going to lose their jobs to people like this, just people on computers watching actors run around. And so they really rejected this space. And rightfully so, because around that exact same time, Disney was getting out of the 2D animation space and had shut down their animation in Burbank and in Florida and moved out of an industry that they'd built for 50 years. So it was pretty scary to see as an animator watching an industry go away while this new thing of technology was coming in. And so they were really afraid that, they would be out of a job or that animation would not exist. And one of the things that cemented those fears even further was in 2006. There were 3 films nominated for Best Animated Feature, and the winner was Happy Feet, which was a mocap movie. And Cars was John Lasseter's baby, and that was one of the only films that didn't win an Academy Award, in that series of films for Pixar. So that was kind of a slight for them. They didn't take it well. So at the end of Ratatouille, which is actually my personal Pixar film, there's a disclaimer. I don't know if you see this at the end of the credits, but it basically says, our quality assurance guarantee, 100% genuine animation, no motion capture. It's still there, I guarantee if you go to the DVD, you'll see it at the end. But this was a message basically to the people in this industry that they weren't really happy and they didn't believe that this was animation. And so after the Polar Express and Monster House, we worked on Beowulf. And this was interesting too, because this was not particularly well received either, but maybe a little bit better than Polar Express, but there's an interesting review and a comment from Wired. It's tough to find a review of the film that doesn't make some reference to the fact that it looks like a 120-minute video game cutscene, probably because it does. That was not a compliment to the film. Video games were still seen as a lesser media, a lesser entertainment form. So they weren't looking at this and complimenting us. They were basically criticizing it and saying, we were putting video games on film. And they probably were rightfully so wondering why
She's
we were
no
doing it.
hag, Beowulf. We both know that. But answer me, did you kill her? Would I have been able to escape her had I not?
So when I first read the script for this, it felt like it read like a live-action movie because it did. It had Anthony Hopkins, it had Angelina Jolie, but we were doing it as a CG film. And even working on it, you were wondering, well, why? Why are we doing this as a CG film? And one of the, Bob Zemeckis, if you read in his kind of justifications for it, he's saying, well, we just couldn't make this film any other way. That really probably wasn't true, but he wanted Ray Winstone to play Beowulf, and Ray Winstone's kind of this big, heavy actor, and he wanted him to be blonde and beautiful and like 7 feet tall or whatever. So yeah, I guess that justified it. But for audiences, they really didn't connect with the fact that there was a digital Angelina Jolie and a digital Anthony Hopkins. They didn't really understand why we did that. I really believe that that was confusing to people. But we learned a lot. We were creating some pretty incredible characters at that time and some techniques that would really influence a lot of stuff later. This character is obviously Beowulf, but its face shapes, the part of the rig, made of about 60 shapes. It couldn't articulate nearly what we can now, but we still were able to do a pretty good job. And this is kind of just how we were able to capture shapes. We basically used motion capture rather than scanning. We would put mocap on Ray and we would do the shapes, and it would a really bad translation of him. And as I was doing research for another presentation a long time ago on the Uncanny Valley, I came up on this, which is really interesting. This was a thesis somebody had done on these movies at this period. It kind of shows you where all of these movies fit on the Uncanny Valley, because ultimately Beowulf hadn't really crossed that barrier either for most people. So for about a decade, from 2001 to 2011, we experimented in this motion capture film space, with Tintin being the last real attempt, if you don't count Avatar, which is probably the biggest film still to date, right? But in this space, this experiment died right after Tintin for the most part. There were no efforts put into any more of these films. They were really expensive, and they didn't really connect with audiences. I think it was too early. I think that digital characters were still in their infancy. I think they were really expensive. I don't think they were really expensive. And they kept being compared to video games, and we weren't respected at that time. But to be honest, more importantly, the audience weren't ready. They just weren't ready to see this kind of content. So we were creating a language, honestly, I believe that. We were creating a new language, but people didn't understand it. They just didn't know what we were doing. So if we fast forward to today, Uncharted 4, a couple of years ago, we released this. We used a lot of the same techniques. All the stuff that we learned in those films kind of translated down, and that's one of the things that I do for PlayStation. And I directly came from those films, but also brought a lot of people with me to take that pipeline and to take these knowledges and bring them down into the game industry so that we could take them to a place where I believe they did belong. While there was no real reason to make a digital version of Angelina Jolie, there's certainly a reason to make a digital version of Nathan Drake. He doesn't exist. He's fabricated, right? He just doesn't exist. So we take those techniques and we expand on them, and we learn a lot more, and we use even more techniques. And this rig is probably 20 to 30 times more complex than the Beowulf rig. And people responded differently, right? The character animation is especially groundbreaking with facial expressions that convey lifelike emotions. Uncharted 4 clearly pushes the PlayStation 4 to the limits, and the final product is one of the most graphically striking games ever developed. and I didn't give you the real bad reviews of Beowulf, but none of them said that. They weren't really striking, they were creepy. So very different in terms of the response. And today, the response is even better, right? We're putting out these games left and right that basically using some of the same techniques that we did in these films, but they're responding better, they're selling more, and now they're also respecting us more as storytellers. And you see in Spider-Man, they're saying that the best movie, right? Like Spider-Man the game is better than the best movie. That's incredible. Who would have thought that would happen? But there's also an interesting trend happening, like we talked about earlier, the budgets, right? Budgets for games like Uncharted are nearing the Beowulf scale. And a large portion of the budget is asset creation. And so it has me thinking, if the fidelity of these assets have surpassed that in film, can we do stuff with these assets? Can we take them to other places? What if now a video game cutscene is really just a scene? And what if the audience is ready now?
Yes, sir. You're such a dick. Come on. Why don't you start with me? Okay, I have a very serious question for you. How bad do I smell?
Like a hot pile of garbage?
Oh, okay. Oh, how about that?
Gross.
You love it.
Every guy in this room is staring at you right now. Maybe they're staring at you. Or not. Maybe they're jealous of you. I'm just a girl, not a threat.
Oh, Ellie. I think they should be terrified of you.
These are not the video games I grew up with, right? We're hitting some pretty mature content, and we're touching some subjects that are pretty controversial, and we really have grown up, and we're really testing new spaces and challenging storytelling and challenging our audience. But I think the audience is responding positively, and I think they like this stuff now. All the indications are that we have arrived, at least technologically, in a place where now people are responding the way we want them to. One of the interesting things for me is that, especially in the audience now, the under 35 market, the passive audience, the ones that are watching, just watching games on Twitch and YouTube, that's a $5 billion industry on its own, just watching games. That's amazing. So before I go to this, this is not real, just so you know, so we don't go out here and start speculating, because this really is not real. But I wanted to take something and put it together and test in my own mind if we could take the we do, reskin it, show it in a different way, and see what would this look like if it was more of a linear, type thing, like a television show. So I'm just going to show you something that is just an experiment. You can tell me if it works or not.
Here's the thing, kid. We don't get to choose how we start in this life. Real greatness is what you do with the hand you're dealt.
How much do you trust this guy?
Yeah, I'm more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. Victor Sullivan.
Anyone ever tell you have a funny idea of romantic?
Looking for my little brother.
You're fast, but you're not that fast.
Little Nadine.
Chloe Fraser.
Chloe is one of the best drivers in the business.
You have a plan?
Just gotta find Rafe.
Rafe.
Jesus.
Oh, this is interesting.
My name is Drake.
It's not personal.
We're all a bunch of thieves digging around where we shouldn't.
So there's nothing crazy there. All it is taking the cutscenes that we pulled from the various games that we've done and just kind of reskinned it and looked at it a little bit differently. Rather than a story of a middle-aged white guy, we have this diverse cast of characters. Could we see if we take this diverse cast and said, look at this something more like Fast and the Furious? Could we look at this completely differently and say, what would this look like if we did a TV show and explored the universe? And, you know, to be honest, I brought this to Evan Wells, the president of Naughty Dog. I said, you know, because I've been talking about this for years about wanting to explore this space. And I said, what do you think? And he said, well, that's a show I'd watch. And you know, it should just look like a video game trailer, but I don't think it does. I think it looks different. And so the times are changing in terms of how we look at video games and what's coming out of them. The content's getting better, the stories, the narratives, the characters. And what's important is that we basically try to keep this trend going and expand on what we're building and explore new opportunities to even deepen this storytelling and grow our base and you know, even increase our engagement with users or viewers. So what happens if we take our IP and we put it into TV? If we take our video games and we put them as, you know, television shows on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, or YouTube? Well, I think what we have for players that we're already seeing is that basically we get this, you know, I don't want to just play, I want to watch, I want to do all these things. And ultimately, I think we can attract new fans to our IP. But also, we can capitalize on all the knowledge we've learned and even grow our opportunities as creators. And if we do it in a game engine, which is leave it in the place that we're already making them now, we get VR for free, kind of, right? It's not exactly the same thing to develop VR, but it's in there. And so as VR is struggling to find its way, what if VR can be more of a companion to the stuff that's a TV show that comes from a game? And then what if the VR stuff becomes more of like a behind-the-scenes way for you to step into the space, like the Talking Dead, right? Where we're actually exploring the world and we're actually interacting with the characters or interacting with the creators. So we're at the final act, and we're gonna have to do this quickly, but the future for this kind of content relies on a thing called virtual production. Anybody hear about that term? Raise your hand if you've heard it. 1, 2, 2. One of them from Epic, who's making it. Good. So what is virtual production? This is a job description for a director of virtual production just posted last month at Netflix. As Netflix looks forward into the future of production, virtual production will exist as a core tenet enabling our unique roster of creatives with breakthrough real-time technologies and dynamic new collaborative workflows. Fascinating. Technologies and workflows. That's exciting. But look at the requirements. Feature film, series, commercial, video game production. Feature film, video game. Well, you've narrowed your market pretty. And then technical proficiency in performance capture, facial capture, experience with real-time technologies, Unity, Unreal, etc. What does that mean? Well, it's actually the holy grail for filmmakers. It's basically the idea that we go back to those films like Beowulf and Polar Express, but we do them in a game engine, and we basically have the ability to create fully rendered CG movies in real time, right? When that happens, we're going to empower the creatives like they've never been empowered before. Our processes for basically making CG films and cinematics is incredibly slow. And the idea that we could start at the sort of ground zero mocap stage, and at that place, we can see the entire movie will be transformative. But one of the challenges is in the real-time space is that to get compelling visuals, typically, currently, in the traditional film pipeline, it takes us hours, sometimes 30 to 40 hours to render one frame and to get that to look, good. And we do a lot of cheats in video games to basically have lighting and visual effects. We don't actually have real-time global illumination. But our goal is Avatar, right? Our goal is eventually to have Avatar in real time. And the other goal is to merge these two worlds, the world of film and the world of games. This is what a traditional film set looks like, or on-location set looks like. Bob Zemeckis hated going to those places because they were cold. So he wanted to be at home in his underwear making movies. And so this is what it's really going to look like, right? It's going to look like a mocap stage with a whole bunch of people in suits, just like the traditional mocap stuff. But what we're going to do is we're going to merge these two jobs together. We're going to take the people from film, and then we're going to take the people from games, and we're going to kind of push them together. And that's what virtual production is ultimately going to do for us. We want to see through the lens this, right? So when we look through that camera, that's what we're going to see. So how do we do that?
So we just shot a take of Roberto and Darren fighting each other. Now we want to review that take. So what we can do now with V-Ray for Motion Builder is replay the take while it's path tracing in real time. So this is the take we just captured, playing back in real time. And at any given moment, we can pause it, and it resolves to final quality. This is a great way to evaluate how the lighting and shaders behave in the take that you just captured. Now that we're using these algorithms that can scale to a final production frame, what you see now, you know, is what you're going to get.
That's not a new video, but we're starting to see
With
even more
Epic
trends.
helping
This is
to make sure the lighting
another
was both
example.
believable and cinematic.
Hellblade showed some of these techniques.
Cubic Motion in Manchester, UK, developed a facial solver that could translate video of Melina's face directly onto the facial rig in real time.
And one of the big key challenges to crossing this is that facial capture in real time. That is not an insignificant challenge, and we also need it to look really good. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Or what are we buying? So there's been a tremendous amount of advances from Cubic Motion on that. This was at GDC this past year.
So what these teams have done is created a way for a actress's performance to be superimposed digitally onto someone else's face, basically. And it looks like the real person talking.
So what you're seeing are pieces of the puzzle. And then one of the big pieces is this too. Unreal Engine is a demo I'll take in a second.
What's the story with all the elevators lately? I heard Kylo Ren destroyed the one over in D sector. If you ask me, who's ever in charge of this place should be transferred to Hoth. What?
So the reflections and shadows look more real than ever, and that's done in real time because of NVIDIA's putting out some new cards that are doing real-time ray tracing. This is another piece of the puzzle. So these are kind of pieces of a grand puzzle, a grand design that has to all come together to kind of build this pipeline. That's that virtual production job at saying these workflows and methodologies, but the pieces are starting to come together. So if you look on the left, this is kind of what a traditional cinematic mocap pipeline looks like. And the goal is to funnel as many of these pieces into one place as possible, so that what we do is we get all of these things to happen live, real time on a set. So it really becomes a film production, not a game production. But it's going to use game methodologies and film methodologies together. But here's some of the challenges. We need some really powerful hardware right now. The NVIDIA cards are going to help. Intel's working on some stuff. The assets are all over the place. They could, one game engine doesn't necessarily go into like Frostbite, for instance, doesn't translate into Unreal easily. If we take Uncharted assets, doesn't go into Unreal easily. So there's no great way to transfer assets and take advantage of assets, especially if we're trying to do it in Unreal or Unity. And I know they're working on that, and that's a really important piece of it. We need asset libraries. So as we create these assets and stuff gets more real, I think we're going to start seeing value in the actual, the assets themselves, because once they get to a certain level, how many more trees are we going to need to create, right? So there's no established pipeline, really. We don't know which game engine is the best. and we have to make something that's easily repeatable. Whether it happens on Unreal or Unity or another engine, I don't know. So these are some of the tools and some of the things that are going to potentially help. Alberto Menache, who was the head of the Polar Express on the CG side, has been working on this problem, trying to basically merge these two worlds for some time, and created this application called PyStage, and that's basically a pipeline to convert assets from one place to another, so that will help. One of the ex-Naughty Dog guys is creating this thing called Prometheum AI, and what that's designed to do is basically be a automatic set generation tool, so that if you need to do rapid set generation, you'll have a whole bunch of your assets in a place, and you'll say, okay, build me a house. Or rather, build me a room, and then you'll say, build me a room like a bedroom, and it will give you a template automatically using machine learning and a whole bunch of algorithms to basically create the room for you. You don't have to design it, and you'll say, okay, I want 4 windows, and it'll put 4 windows. It's going to tell you, it's going to naturally put those windows where they probably should go. So it's going to basically be, in the hopes of what he's trying to do, is an automatic set generation based on real world parameters, and it'll learn from you. And of course, these Quadro Pro things, the cards from NVIDIA, are super important. And then there's another thing called USD, which is a format from Pixar that basically will make going from one application like Maya to Unreal to whatever much easier, going back and forth. And Unreal now supports that. It's still really in its infancy, but these are the kinds of things that are going to make this stuff more plausible. But here's what it means to Malaysia, here's what it means to you, and here's what it means to me. There's a new blue ocean coming here. There's a whole lot of new jobs that are going to be created because of this space. But they're jobs that are basically coming from the place you guys already know how to do. The traditional VFX houses, they don't work with restrictions. They don't work in real time. They don't work in limitations. So what ends up happening is in real time, our props, our sets, our characters have to work in the confines of limitations, and they're very technical. And the film pipelines don't really work in that way. So what's going to happen is that we're going to see that these video game jobs are going to correlate to film jobs. So you're going to see stuff that in virtual production, again, this is something that you can almost market yourself if you're in art outsource or an art partner in this new space, because it's ultimately the same thing, right? The film guys are going to start looking for places to find environments for their sets and their props, which is the same thing we're doing in your game for our game sets and props. But these guys are going to be looking for it and not necessarily know where to go. And ultimately, it's, like I said, once these shows start coming, it's going to create a whole brand new market. This is not going to take away from the video game market. It's going to be additive to it. And then these jobs are going to basically kind of, in a weird way, correlate or replace some of the jobs that are happening in film, like lighting, which will happen in Unreal, will kind of replace that of a grip in film. And costume designer will be, something that you'll do, in CG. And the virtual camera replaced the camera to some degree, although you'll probably hire a cameraman. So I'm going to leave you on this. We're just about done. I really believe in this space. I really believe it's coming. I know it's coming. And I think it's going to create a whole lot of opportunity for the game industry, for IP, for artists, for filmmakers. Keep your eye on it. But I also think it's a really interesting opportunity for Malaysia. This is, no one's ready for this yet. Literally no one. And if you are already in game production, you can get a leg up and kind of get in at the ground floor at the beginning of something. So I'm going to leave you with a fun scene.
No, it was valiant.
I was in the
really
ballpark, right?
In a different state, but yeah, you were in a ballpark. Jameson asked you about that Malaysia job again.
Jameson always asks me about the Malaysia job.
Look, Nate, I really think that you should take it.
What do you think? Should he take it? Let's do it. Thank you, guys. Have a great level up, KO. Appreciate it. I hope we had some fun.
Thank you, Michael, for that very interesting presentation. Thank you. Very inspiring.
Having Michael here is a real treat, so I think we can't let him go without allowing him to answer a few questions. So we're going to put him on the spot and keep it open mic. So I'm sure you're inspired listening to what Michael had to say earlier. Do you have questions that you'd like to direct to Michael? Right now, we're going to give you 5 minutes and make them short and sweet.
Does this work? Yeah. No questions are fine.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Got one.
Gentleman who spent his whole night playing games.
You're going to come to the front? Okay, we have a mic coming to you. Please, your name?
Yeah, so what's your opinion about The Walking Dead's, at least the first episode, at least in the first season, about regarding of Lee's death?
Oh, wait, sorry. This season? Or the actual Walking Dead first season?
The final episode at the first season.
The final episode of the first... what do I think of the final episode of the first season of The Walking Dead?
The Walking Dead.
The original first season?
Yeah.
Oh, where they went to the CD, whatever the...
No. Like, your opinion is about how Lee's death was like quite an impact, even though it's not about the character alone, but the voice actors also expressed it because he was actually merged with the character itself while trying to act like he's dead because Clementine as well, while he was dying.
You know, I don't remember.
There have been so many seasons since that first one.
Yeah, I love The Walking Dead, but I haven't seen the latest few seasons, and the first season was so long ago. You remember it a lot better than I do.
I mean,
what do you think about it?
I mean, we cried a lot. I'm not gonna lie.
You were sad?
I mean, it's quite an impact. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, no, I'm like it. Listen,
give it a go and prepare some tissues.
let me go watch it again. We'll call you. I'll tell you what I think.
All right, let's take a question about something that Michael presented, maybe something more specific and recent. Yes.
All right.
We've got someone who's speaking on the Women in Games panel.
Thank you. That was a great talk. Thank you. My question is about like Netflix and the TV show where they have multiple endings, similar to what Black Mirror is gonna do for the next season. What do you think of that new medium for TV shows?
Which platform?
On Netflix, Black Mirror.
Oh, Black Mirror.
Yeah.
You guys are killing me with this, like the shows.
I mean like in TV shows, how they have like multiple endings where you can drive your own story.
Okay.
And I think that's inspired by video games, and they've adopted that.
So to your point, yes, I think the funny thing is, it's a good point that it won't just be linear. There will be, I think there will be linear, but they're also going to explore that sort of choose your own adventure kind of expression. That's already being talked about. There are people doing it. You can see on Netflix they're doing it. I am curious about that. I think the spaces are going to diverge a little bit, and I think they're going to test those markets, and I think it's going to be kind of game-like. Like it'll be a little bit gamey, but less, less hardcore, and you will be able to kind of choose which direction you want to go into. It will definitely happen. With being the fact that these things will be created in game engines, it's so much easier to do that. So, yeah, I don't know exactly where that's going to go, but I know that is a space that is going to happen.
I think we got one more question. Time for one more question.
Okay.
Hi, Mike. Wanizul Islam from NTV7. My question would be more related towards this event, Level Up KL. Perspective for the Southeast Asian gaming developing region. What do you think the future is for game development here in Southeast Asia? Do you think, do we have a bright, foreseeable future? What next? Do you think?
Like this question. This is my 5th year coming to Malaysia. I love it here. I love it. I've been all over the world, kind of, visiting different regions and checking out what's happening in game development. And this, honestly, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia is my favorite. It really is an unbelievable blend. I mean that genuinely.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you.
I think that you know, I didn't go into too much of my past. I started as an independent game developer in New York, where I told you there were no game studios to work in. And it wasn't quite as dramatically difficult as it is in Southeast Asia, because I could move, you know, to another state where there were, you know, studios. But it really, if I wanted to work in games, I had to create that opportunity. So I know what that feels like. And here, what I love about it is it feels the way I felt back then. Is I see so many people that are hungry and talented and inspired and are consuming the same types of content that I consume, not just in the East, but in the West. And so I feel like this is the place where the future of interactive entertainment is going to happen. And I say that because you see how big the China market is. You see how big the game market is in Asia. It's overshadowing the rest of the world, and quickly will become the #1 market. And I think you guys are poised essentially to define this and be at the beginning of the next generation of game development. Who knows what that's going to be? I don't know if it's going to be, you know, AAA or mobile or whatever, but I think for sure it's going to happen here. And every time I come back and I see how quickly Level Up is growing, and just see how fast the ecosystem and how fast it's growing, I'm inspired. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here today, for sure, because I am so encouraged by this region. I'm so encouraged by the talent here. I love this area, and you guys are inspiring me. So
Wow.
Thank
That's
you.
a big compliment. Thank you so much, Michael. Wow, and this is so exciting. So much happening.